You feel like the world is moving too fast? Every day around the world, people spend 6.5 hours on one screen or another. We see approvals given with thumb swipes and emoji, and attention is measured in fractions of a second. Our digital lives are creeping into our analog lives, and it has effects. And it had effects on me. I'm going to tell you about the journey of when I burned out as a high-profile digital executive and how I was wondering what would happen next and where I found my inspiration. And hopefully, I'll help you find some inspiration for a journey that you're on. When I went to college, I was pre-med, but rather than do the typical biology degree that most pre-meds do, I decided to be a classics major. I figured I'd get a good, solid liberal arts education because I'd be scienced up the wazoo for the rest of my career. Spoiler alert, I did not become a doctor. Although I did spend a year at medical school, I threw on a thesis for good measure and an MBA in healthcare management. I went on to work in managed care and pharma and biotech industries, and then digital and social media came calling, and finally, that led to Ford Motor Company, where I was recruited to be the first global head of social media for the company in 2008, back when Alan Mulally was leading the charge, bringing Ford to profitability by 2009. On my 10th day on the job, Ford filed an $8.7 billion quarterly loss, and the global carpocalypse was on. Now, we managed to get through that time. It was one crisis after another. Me and my team were doing digital hand-to-hand combat online. It was exhausting, but we succeeded. And then we went on to do other great things, be the first car company to reveal a vehicle on Facebook, first company to have a Q&A with its CEO on Twitter. We were literally and figuratively paving the road behind us. But much like the parable of the rich fool, outward appearances are deceptive, and I felt like I was having a crisis myself. While it seemed that I was successful, I was stressed out. I was at the end of my rope. I became less positive, less patient, less of a leader than I wanted to be, less of a person than I wanted to be. And I knew something had to change. I needed to find some kind of purpose. And so I left that job. But I didn't exactly know what I was going to do next. We had a family vacation planned, a trip to Washington, D.C., and I found myself in the U.S. Capitol, standing in Statuary Hall, looking around at these wonderful monuments to leaders of the past. And I heard the echoes of the voices around that hall, but I also heard echoes of my own past calling to me. I turned, and there I saw Cleo, the muse of history. Now, when I was in college, my senior thesis for my classics degree was classical sculpture in the Federal Triangle in Washington, D.C. And here I was staring up at Cleo on her winged chariot, the muse of history, looking back toward the past while the chariot races forward to the future. And you see, the wheel of that chariot is an old-fashioned clock with two hands and a face. And as I stood on that spot, I realized that in 1989, David McCullough, the historian and author, gave a speech where he said, "I've decided that the digital watch is the perfect symbol of an imbalance of outlook in our day. It tells us only the time it is now, at this instant, as if that were all anyone would wish or need to know." And I realized while I was at Ford, I was living on digital time. I was showing up for work every day, living in the moment, responding to a relentlessly ravenous online public that wanted answers now. And there had to be more. But what was it? Where could I find that inspiration? Well, when you're in Washington, you're surrounded by all kinds of inspiration and quotes, and Daniel Boorstin, as the Librarian of Congress, said that trying to plan for the future without a sense of the past is like trying to plant cut flowers. And I had seen plenty of instances of people planting cut flowers, wondering why they wouldn't fully bloom, wondering why they wouldn't come back the next spring, making the same mistakes over and over again. Why? Because they didn't study the past. They ignored or didn't remember history. It doesn't matter whether it's world history or the history of their company or the history of what they themselves did in a timeline. But what is history but a collection of stories about human nature? And human nature gets at the truth of what we are. And thinking back to my classical education, I remember De Architectura by Vitruvius, famous for the Vitruvian triad, that said that for architecture to be good, buildings needed to be beautiful, useful, or true. So buildings needed to be aesthetically pleasing, they needed to be functional, and they needed to be structurally sound. That's what he meant by true. And true, actually, in building, does have a meaning. It means something is plumb, level, and square. Plumb is perfectly vertical, level is perfectly horizontal, square is when two sides come together at 90 degrees. But we all know that the word true has many other meanings. And when we think about truth, and particularly in our day and age, when people are struggling with the truth, in our age of misinformation and fake news, and now AI, people have fears and doubts and are uncertain about where the future is going to go. But I ask, wasn't that always the way? Weren't we always fearful and uncertain about what was coming next? Weren't we always wondering about why is this generation the worst generation ever? Cicero said, O tempora, O mores, O the times, O the morals. We are the same. And when I think to where I wanted to go with my career, I decided to build my future with the lumber of the past. And the stories of humanity can be found anywhere, on scraps of papyrus or stone tablets, in epic poems or painted ceilings, on ship's logs or bronze coins. We can be inspired by anything we want if we're paying attention. The wisdom of Lincoln, the hubris of Odysseus, the courage of Harriet Tubman, the jealousy of Othello, the righteousness of Atticus Finch, the greed of Ebenezer Scrooge. Their vices and their virtues are the same as ours here today. 2024 is not humanity's first rodeo. And so I thought, as I explored what I would do with executives and helping them become better leaders and better communicators, why not dip into timeless leadership principles? Principles like empathy and integrity, generosity and vulnerability, teamwork, humility. Principles that are beautiful and useful and true. Principles that are just as relevant in the 21st century as they were in the first century. And if we want to pay attention to what's happening around us, it requires us to dedicate our time to ensuring that we are taking it all in. If we take the time to explore beyond what's right in front of our faces. We can find things to inspire. Maybe it's time that we buy an old-fashioned clock, one with a face and two hands, one that tells us what time it was, what time it will be. Inspiration is wherever you can find it. What's inspiring you to create something that's beautiful or useful or true? Thank you.